Hello and welcome to the CX Files for July 25th, 2024. My name is Mark Hillary and I'm in Sao Paulo, Brazil.
And I'm Peter Ryan in Montreal. Mark, great to see you, and really excited because I think we've got a longtime friend of the podcast who's come back for a chat and to give us a bit of an update in terms of a new initiative.
Yes, absolutely. In June, I was in London and Alistair Niederer, our good friend who has been on this pod before, he invited me to an event that was being held in London. And unfortunately, I couldn't make it. On the day I got stuck somewhere else. But I arranged to meet him the following day to talk about it. And this was the launch of the FormIGA Foundation, which is the Industry for Good Alliance. It's a joint venture being organized by the GSA and the IAOP. So, all of these well-known international sourcing bodies have basically got together to try and create this group that's focused on the sourcing industry actually doing some good. And I think that, we've all seen over the years these kind of alliances and think tanks and people actually kind of just producing papers that tell everybody that we should all be doing better, and not much really happens. But, this time they are actually doing practical stuff. Alistair is leading this, and he's actually doing ESG audits for companies. So, anybody within this kind of sourcing sector and beyond can get themselves audited and then use that audit either as a sort of template for where they need to improve, or if they are already doing very well, then they can use it essentially as a marketing device to talk to their customers, their partners, and say, look, this is why you should be doing more business with us because, clearly we're doing the right thing here.
Yeah, and I'm delighted that Alistair's part of this initiative. I'm delighted that he's bringing it and evangelizing it on shows like our own. The reality is that ESG is a thing, and it's not a flash in the pan. There is a lot of substance behind it. I was recently at the Nearshore Nexus event that our friend Kirk Laughlin put on in New York City, and he had Rita Soni, who was in from Everest Group, who I think gave one of the best presentations I've heard about ESG and diversity and all things that go along with it, and not talking about some of the fluffy puffy stuff, and as you say, using it about, oh well, we have to do this because it's going to save the world, etc. She gave a proper business case for why this is important and why outsourcers and why organizations that are looking to try and provide frontline services need to be embracing this. And I truly believe having somebody like Alistair, who, as we all know, has a tremendous pedigree in our industry from the provider side, coming in and championing this, gives it a whole new level of credibility.
Yeah, and I think that we're starting to see that there really is a genuine business case now. If you look at the retail industry, fashion is a particular example where customers are actually asking, where does this stuff come from? Are there slaves in the supply chain? So, if you can use this to demonstrate the value to your customers, if you can make your company more attractive, then you're going to attract the best talent. So it's great for finding better employees. And at the same time, if you're looking for investment, nowadays, many investors are actually saying, well, what's your ESG plan? How is your company performing? Do you have good corporate governance, et cetera, et cetera? And if you can't demonstrate that, then you won't get the investment. So, there really are multiple angles where this does matter now, much more than the old days of corporate social responsibility, where we just used to publish a paragraph in the annual report telling everybody how good we are.
Yeah, exactly. Those days of CSR and those acronyms about CSR, those days are long gone. Buyers, especially larger organizations, are definitely looking for substance. They're looking for case studies. They're looking for a track record in ESG. And those outsourcing organizations or business service providers that don't embrace this and find a way of incorporating it from a substantial standpoint into their business model are the ones that we're going to lose out.
All right, so let's go straight to my discussion with Alistair Niederer.
Cool.
All right, Alistair, we met recently in London and had a chat about the launch of FormIGA, which is an initiative that the GSA has launched with the IAOP. Both big groups that support and promote sourcing and responsible sourcing. So what's the new initiative about, and who's involved in that?
Hi, Mark, and hi, everybody. Yes, it was great to meet and share the usual thoughts and ideas. And, it's a pleasure to be able to explain the initiative that the GSA and IAOP are involved with, Kerry and Debbie and their teams. And FormIGA is really the partnership of IAOP to provide global initiatives under each of their individual banners and to operate and take the best of what they're doing and share those experiences. So FormIGA is what they are referring to as an Industry for Good Alliance, which is the IGA piece of the word FormIGA. And the word FormIGA in Portuguese, as you'll know, stands for ant. So an ant is the strength and the dexterity of an ant. So the FormIGA initiative is launched and up and running. And one of the first tangible exercises in that was to follow up on something that I've been working with in the GSA for some time, which is the difficulty of the buyer community to work out how best to understand the relative maturity of their service providers and the technology and business service sector. And so having spent a lot of time working with many of the buy-side community, and then also working and having represented the service provider side of the business to understand how we could work together as an association and the wider association of FormIGA to put in place tools that allow the entire value chain to work better. Value chain meaning the upside or the up and the down of the normal supply chain. So it's not just about the supplier community, it's about those that need to report upwards and downwards. So FormIGA's first delivery is what they have called the Service Provider Sustainability Index. And that is, as it says, an index, which is not just an assessment, but it's backed by a self-assessment tool, which then allows FormIGA to understand the relative maturity of all of the people and really of the industry, and to report back regularly on the state of the industry and responsibilities to sustainability.
Okay, so there's lots of industry bodies out there that are kind of focused on networking and sharing best practice and stuff, but it seems that you're actually talking about offering an actual kind of audit on ESG status. So how does that work, and what do companies get from doing this index or audit then?
Yeah, I think at its heart, at their hearts, the GSA and IAOP have always been individually offering beyond the updates of industry and conferences and database, but they've been working and networking. They have been offering tools to assist in the relationship between the buy side and the sell side. And what this is just a maturation of that, an initiative that was started with the GSA, and then they pulled in the IAOP to be the founding partners of FormIGA. And so I was involved with them in spending a lot of time researching what was happening, how people were currently trying to understand the relative maturity of their service provider network. And that ranged from asking 6 questions to asking for a third-party assessment to be done to asking reams and reams of pages on spreadsheets. And so it was really quite diverse. So it was clearly obvious that something needed to be put together to help everybody and to help the industry in putting this tool together. So for the buyers, they were able to very easily assess the relative maturity of small, medium, and large suppliers, and do it in a standard format, but also a format that understands its relative positioning in the industry. For the service providers, then it allows them, when they're having to answer an awful lot of RFPs and questions where they generally approach this from so many different angles, to have a structured way of doing this and only need to do it once and once a year. So they're able to go through the self-assessment program. They're able to understand where they are relative to others, and whether they're small, medium, or large gives them the ability to have a seat at the table. And around all of this is understanding that the buy-side community right now is probably averaging 20% of their scoring for a service provider when they're looking at renewing contracts or taking on new contracts. So it's a pretty chunky piece of evaluation.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was going to ask next, like the real value of doing one of these assessments. I mean, do you see then, if you're a BPO, for example, is that helping you to attract more clients, or even something like making you more attractive to employees as well?
Yeah, at the heart of the ESG, if you go back and look at what ESG is all about, it's ours, it's an individual's, it's a company's responsibility to understand their position and what they're doing for people, planet, and profit. But somewhere between 50 and 80% of what exists inside ESG, which is really about policies and procedures to understand risk and opportunities. I tend to focus more on the opportunity side of things, which says, firstly, if you're not able to make a good account of yourself under some sort of reporting format to show what you're doing with ESG, then you're likely to not make it to a shortlist for selection. So clearly, it's valuable in terms of wanting to grow your business. But secondly, we have to understand that ESG, with that 50 to 80% existing in your business, it already needs to be something that you are right on top of. So it is, so firstly, good business practice, but it helps you to go out there and win more business. And over time, if you look up the value chain, you're going to see that it's going to be responding to mandatory requirements and legal requirements, certainly in the space of environmental, but that's already covered under governance in a lot of areas. So it's just expanding that sort of validation of your position.
Okay. But the problem, I suppose, that some critics will say is that companies like BPOs focusing on this kind of for good type focus, and really focusing on ESG heavily, aren't they just adding a lot of cost to their service? I mean, isn't everybody just looking for value right now?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it sits at the really at the fundamental position that ESG finds itself. And certainly there are big variances between APAC, Europe, and the USA. And to use a well-known phrase, there's an awful lot of fake news, which is really showing and telling everybody that if you're spending time in ESG and ESG reporting, then it's really counterproductive. It costs. It doesn't add to the business formula. But that's not the case. And if you understand the depth of ESG in terms of all of its contributing elements, you understand that these are just standard business questions. And I think there's plenty of cases and evidence to prove that, particularly on the environmental side of things, that it's cost neutral because you're taking initiatives that are important. The issue that people face is that the relative maturity, if you look at the life cycle of ESG, is that companies, and particularly medium companies or small companies, they don't have a budget for such thing, and they don't have a focus or a strategic plan for it. So the intention of FormIGA is that we remove all of that hype, and I guess it's gone through that hype cycle into that period of not necessarily despondency, but where people are questioning it before it really beds in as being just a fundamental element of a business. After all, ESG as a term has been around for 20 years. So it's important that people understand that it is just a it's kind of it's something that just really needs to be done, as good business practice.
Yeah, and of course, ESG itself is describing quite a lot of different factors. You've got the environment, the social and kind of community angle, and then the corporate governance. Are you actually running a good company and looking after your people? Is there any one area that people are focusing on more than others? I mean, you just mentioned climate change, and the environment seems to be a popular focus, but is that coming out above other areas?
It's a good question, and one that we debated a lot in terms of the relative values of E and S and G. And the Service Provider Sustainability Index, the SPSI, is weighted in such a way that, amongst many things, it really is built by the industry for the industry. So the weightings that we get in terms of its importance is 60% on social sustainability, 20% on environmental, and 20% on governance. And so we're seeing that, and when you go through the process of understanding what you need to discover in your business, you'll find that all of the elements inside of ESG are just things that you would normally expect in a business. Because after all, ESG is nothing more than the coalescence of a lot of business elements that need to be pulled together into a simple framework that allows anybody, any stakeholder of a business, to be able to see how it looks, how it scores, and its relative importance.
And is this accepted around the world then? Because, you mentioned that FormIGA, you're working with the IAOP, and it's a global initiative, but is ESG itself just a sort of popular American business practice, or are we seeing others around the world adopting this?
Yeah, it's interesting because it's actually almost the reverse of that. So ESG and its wider sense, sustainability, has been adopted and is being adopted rapidly across Europe, a lot more in advance of the US. In fact, typically ESG is not a term, because of the kind of fake news that we experienced 12 months ago, is not a term that people like to use. And they will talk more about corporate social responsibility or sustainability, and not really wanting to go down that ESG path, but it's just the same thing by a different name. And, I always look at it in terms of saying that it's more important that you understand your own corporate social responsibility and how you are caring for people, planet, and profit, or responsible profit. And there is just so much noise. And what we see as a result of that puts everything a little bit ass about face, because what it does is push people more towards compliance, whereas they should be looking at risk and opportunity. So it's where you have an initiative like FormIGA, it's actually being able to say, well, let's talk to the top of these organizations. Let's talk to the buy side. Let's talk to the supplier side. Let's talk to the decision makers and the CEOs of these businesses, and let's help them from a third-party standpoint to understand the relative importance of this, and show how it's really important to understand, not only what is your relative maturity, or what is the relative maturity of each of your service providers, but what is material, and how can we show anybody who's wanting to use my services, what our plan is for the future. Because ESG, whatever name you use, is something that's been with us and will be with us for a long time.
Okay, great. And just to wrap up then, what's coming up for you in the year ahead? And how do you think we're going to see things developing now that there is a much more serious focus on impact sourcing and ESG?
Yeah, impact sourcing is really important, and the BPO industry is a great example where the impact that BPO has made in the world is immense, and possibly one of the greatest in terms of social sustainability, where we have provided employment and money and life to people across the globe. So BPO affects everybody in a global fashion. So what you're seeing is we need to understand that there's a way to understand what's often been referred to as greenwashing, or at the moment it's more appropriate to use the term green hushing. But what you look at is saying, if we've got a currency by which we can measure the relative efforts of each of the service providers, not just the large ones who can, afford to do a lot of work in this space and have chief sustainability officers and the likes, but anybody who is being involved in doing some great impact sourcing, we can value that. We can give it a currency. We can give it a scoring. So that's the really important aspect of this. It's actually by the industry, for the industry. It's relevant. It's something that everybody needs to do on both the buy side and the sell side. But in answer to your question about what's coming up and what are we looking at as we head towards 2025, it's actually understanding things like the impact of AI on ESG, because they're quite tightly coupled. So, it's a living, breathing thing that says what's important to our industry and what do we need to make sure we continue to measure and compare and benchmark.
Okay, Alistair, that's a great summary. Good luck with FormIGA, and hope everything goes well over the next year or so.
Thank you, Mark. And remember that this is an initiative by the Industry for Good Alliance, and regardless, this is something that everybody needs to get on board with. It is really important. It is really valuable. And I think when you just go back and say it's all about risk and it's all about opportunity, and the opportunity side and enhancing the value chain is something that we all need to be part of. And so it is a great initiative.
Thanks for listening to the CX Files podcast. We really appreciate your feedback and suggestions. You can reach myself, Mark Hillary, or Peter Ryan via LinkedIn. Please also leave a rating or review on your favourite podcast provider, as that helps more people to find us. As always, we'd like to thank Chris Haig at Traction Media for the CX Files graphics. See you next week.